Worse Than Death by Aidan Mayberger. It was Abel's holy duty to slay the innocent, freeing her, but the girl was gone, fled from his gift, or captured and debauched by vile heretics. She hasn't been home since she went into the wood for herbs, Master Squire. The hulking farmer kneaded his cap nervously over the heads of the three boys. They each had skin thick with scars and faces past their years from strain. Abel, the prettiest of the three, had dark eyes that burned with restrained passion. Citro looked over his shoulder. Abel was not looking forward to tonight, when he would have to force food down Cicero's throat. None of it was poisoned. Why would it be poisoned? Ivan, plainest of the three, with a round nose and soft jaw, looked over his shoulder for a different reason. Abel had to admit that village girl was pretty, and he did find her distracting. He wrangled himself, then asked, "Which part of these woods did she enter?" The man pointed. "Just over yonder." "And her dress?" "Simple and white, Master Squire." "Anyone else in there?" "Not by my knowing." The woods were a stout, mossy tangle of gnarled trees. Beyond the snarled wood was the monstrous Castle Monette, its keep a massive, looming tower. The fortress was shrouded in the shade of the mountains beyond it, its perch amongst the peaks the perfect natural defense. "Ivan, go to the castle and inquire the Countess Monette about the innocent," Abel said. "My pleasure," the boy responded. It would be better to send Citro into the woods, but... "Citro, ask around town. I'll head into the woods. We shall meet at the local church before nightfall." The others nodded, Citro letting out a breath of relief before glancing nervously at the woods. The woods were humid and hot. Leaves crunched and moss squished, but no sticks snapped. There was a sort of path through the trees. The villagers must have explored the woods frequently. Abel gritted his teeth. Citro was such a coward. Perhaps he needed a push from Abel, but Abel hadn't the heart. The sun, a halo of light that peeked from beyond a black hole, dimmed, and the sounds of the village faded. A strange fear lay over Abel. The air was heavy, and the trees seemed to reach in from all sides. Abel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When they opened, he was the predator. Fear beaten back by foolhardy overconfidence, he pressed forward. This place was not to be traveled alone by any villager, not that big farmer, and especially not a young girl. The innocent was not alone. But who was with her? His eyes strained as he searched the dim woods for signs. From a large stone he found a slip of moss that had slid under a shoe. It was thin, probably the girl's. Abel took a measurement with his hand, then sprang atop the rock. He looked about. Citro would have seen signs of the other, but Abel did not. Abel hopped off the rock and strode impatiently forward for a while. The cramped confines of the wood gave way to larger, more decrepit trees. Huge branches leaned to the forest floor and shot back up. The scent of rot lay thick as the moss and vines. Something bothered Abel. He stood still, and perfect silence fell. What was wrong with these woods? The mud was near as dry as anything in these woods. There were many footprints, thin and long. The girls, Abel thought. However, amongst the mess was a single footprint. It was thicker, but not by much. A woman's? The print was clearer. The girl must have been swinging her feet. The leaves next to the mud were covered in it, and swept aside. Had the woman wiped her feet on them? Or was it his imagination? After all, what kind of villager wiped off the mud immediately when walking would clean the shoe just fine? The light dimmed further as the castle Monet loomed above him. The forest clung desperately to the slope and stone. The steep road up to the castle was nearby. The last ray of sun glinted off of something bright, a piece of white cloth. It was crammed between two stones under a massive tree. The tree's roots clutched the stones together tightly. Abel looked at the cloth and frowned. It had no signs of being ripped. He tugged on it. It stayed in place. So he gripped it tightly and threw himself back. The cloth ripped. He landed hard on his rear and looked puzzled at the cloth. It was crammed, tight and deep into the stone. He brought his knife out and tested the gap. Then he took the piece of cloth he now had in his hand and tried to push, pull, and squeeze the piece into the stone. He couldn't get the cloth into the crack. He frowned, then looked to the sky, and rushed back to the village. Citro and Abel sat under the half-moon. They watched the road up to the castle with sinking dread and building fury. Abel snapped, "Bloody burning crude! I knew Ivan would want to see the Countess Monette, famed for generations of beauty without peer, but I didn't think he'd stay the night at a keep." Abel let his wrath swallow his envy. Citro chewed his nails. He must be dead or captured. Only a noble lady would wipe her feet of mud. Only she could have been in the woods with the innocent without the villagers knowing it. With his other hand he scratched his head violently. "We should tell the watchman. Crush her with 1,000 squires." "Shut your burning fool's mouth." Citro glared coldly. "You lead us when you're calm, Abel. I do when you're not." Abel's eyes flared with anger. Then he forced them closed and took a deep breath. Then another. "True enough, but I do not think this should be brought to the watchman yet, as we need more proof. I will not go to the Countess. So tomorrow, at the break of dawn, we shall pry those rocks apart. Tonight, you shall lap around the church, till you tire enough to sleep." Abel nodded while gritting his teeth. Rules restrained his fury, and he did as he was told. "No torches," Citro said. "She'll see us coming." "It's still dark, Citro. Those woods are dark in the daylight. We will need a little light," Citro grumbled. "Keep it at a candle." Covering the candle flames with their hands, the two squires stumbled their way through the woods. They made the trek shortly, only stopping to show Citro the footprints. Finally, getting to the stone and the tree, Abel leaned against it and let Citro mutter about. "What are you looking for?" Abel asked. "Shh, quiet. We're close now." As he had said, at the crack of dawn, as light shone about the castle, its shadow still keeping the village below dark, Citro split the two stones apart with a loud crack. A dark hall was revealed to Citro, and as Abel watched, a blade leapt from the shadow. It took Citro in the neck. The boy twisted and fell. Abel let down his minus. An arming sword rasped from his scabbard. The light of dawn seemed crimson as Abel's muscles tensed and his bone froze. "Ivan?" The squire looked as shocked as Abel felt. His hand went to his head. His eyes looked glazed over. Ivan raised his sword. "No further, Abel. No further." A confused fear seemed locked behind glassy eyes. Abel spoke quietly. "You're going to let me pass, Ivan. I need to see what she is hiding." "She hides nothing." Ivan's voice was layered with clear lust. Abel's anger flared. He was going to have that witch's head for this. He struck, a simple overhead swing. Ivan blocked, knocking the blade away with his own. Abel took Ivan's riposte on his forearm, the sword sticking to bone. He turned his battered overhead into a thrust. The blade sunk deep as Ivan failed to pry his sword out in time. Abel, with his rage filling his chest with heat and his eyes with fire, ripped the blade from Ivan's chest with such strength that it tore Abel's own muscles and made his bones creak. Ivan stumbled, letting go of his blade and clutching his chest in one hand, while he fumbled with his vial with the other. Abel hacked again, then again. His minus rose and trembled. Tears rolled down his face as he knelt at the corpse. Abel worked Ivan's minus out of his arm, then retrieved his own vial and poured the blood within down his throat. His arm healed in part. It worked well enough. He spun, suddenly remembering Citro. The paranoid squire was breathing raggedly. The blood in his vial hadn't been enough to prevent his consciousness from slipping away. Abel hauled Citro up and into the dark tunnel where Ivan's cooling corpse rested. Now close enough to the body, Abel took the blood from Ivan into the vial of Citro. Then, in a practiced motion, Abel force-fed Citro's vial to him. A moment later, he slapped Citro's face a few times. Citro's eyes snapped open. He stared at the corpse in the hall. "Tell me, this is my sickness," he rasped. "Tell me the body before me doesn't belong to him." Abel remained silent. He couldn't admit it himself. "I want proof. If it comes to it, run with the evidence." Citro nodded, ignoring the rage in Abel's voice. Their candles flickered in the long, dark hall. It was level, but it felt like a steep incline and a sudden drop, all at once. The tunnel bent on itself, once, then twice. Around the second bend, a prick of red light could be seen. It grew and grew, till they emerged into a vast chamber. Despite the orange flame from 100 candles and half a dozen braziers, the room glowed red. The walls were cut of stone bricks, neat and orderly. They supported a high-vaulted ceiling, veiled in darkness. Around the side of the room was a walkway of similar material to the walls. Dried corpses hung by their ankles from corroding spikes. The corpses each had their stomachs cut open and were left naked. There were hundreds of them, and every single one had been a girl or young woman. The walkways surrounded a large pool of blood. Citro bolted for the exit, but a clear voice rang out from within the room. "Stop." Citro froze, his eyes glazing over. Abel looked towards the voice. A woman rose from the blood. Abel, too, froze. A confused rush of emotion flooded him. Hatred, anger, lust, admiration, all at once. he wrestled with himself. Despite the blood rolling off her, she was gorgeous. Not even the tempters, masters of illusion, could create such beauty. No, majesty. He wanted to bend the knee and swear his eternal faith, to forsake his holy duty. He wanted to tear her head from her body. Of course, all this was amplified by her complete nudity. She pushed with her hands down, and the blood covering her shot away. She raised her hands, and the blood of the pool flooded up, covering her with an ever-flowing crimson dress. The force of the motion snapped her hair tie, and her raven locks burst from her bun into a chaotic mess. Citro broke her enchantment first and fled. The woman's hand snapped out. The blood obeyed. A tide flooded forth and rushed down the hall. Citro screamed as he was blocked off from escape. The shout shook Abel, and he charged. His foot slammed through the surface of the blood, and sank. The rest of his body followed, deeper and deeper. He flailed, the blood blinding him. Even being submerged a few feet deep completely disoriented him. The shock and the stench, the sheer horror of the source of the blood. His hand slammed into the rim of the walkway around the pool. He threw himself upward. He wiped the blood from his eyes to reveal the sight of a blade of blood punching through Citro's chest. Life vanished from his eyes. The woman had changed. She was towering. Her shoulders, arms, and hips sported twisting spires of bone. In absolute fear, Abel raised his gaze to where her eyes should have been. They were there. Confusion entered his mind. This creature was not a full demon. Fear abated, and fury returned, redoubled and empowered. With a shout, he hurtled toward her. She laughed in pure joy. "I like you, boy. Obey." His heart cried as he flooded a sudden passion for her away with rage. She smiled at his refusal. His blade sang as he swung it, light glinting off the steel. Abel experienced the strike in a surprisingly slow calm. He knew he would be blocked by her sword before she moved. Each strike that followed was in a flurry, yet he saw each of the blows' destinies before they finished. No matter his shift in position, no matter how he dropped the blow or fainted, each strike had the same fate. Blocked. She smiled and whispered, "Be mine." He hesitated for a single moment. In that frozen moment, she snaked into his reach, her hands, somehow without her sword, clenched around him. He thought she would have been stronger, but her touch was a gentle caress. He moved a hand for his knife, but he was too slow, and she kissed him. Her soft body seemed to melt around him, and all his strength melted with it. Then she twisted the bone from his body. In blinding pain, she spun bone like sugar from his flesh. His muscles swelled and burst to heal and swell. She kept whispering in his ear, "Be mine, be mine." Abel's will struggled as each word threatened to overwhelm him. As he fought the voice, it seemed to disrupt her foul magic. The bone spluttered as it spun. Her smile only grew as he struggled. "Never before," she whispered, "have I won the battle of will with a squire." Her desire crashed over him. He felt the rage and lust in his heart. Sing with it. Harmonize. He had leaned on his rage to battle her will. With its absence, His desperate battle seemed hopeless. "I would rather die," he thought, "than let her corrupt my flesh and my heart." Her foul magics had him frozen physically, but his will could push against her changes and change them. So he decided to work with her. Bone spiraled out of him wildly, and her joy fled. Sweat ran down her brow as she desperately pushed the corruption back and away from his heart. He grinned a bloody grin as his own rib cage crushed his heart. The end of Worse Than Death. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe, and ring that cursed little bell.